And I remember being in Vilnius, and I came across this article. It was a quote from a politician in Lithuania, and the newspaper had reported it, like the exact quote, right? It said, these are not migrants, these are not refugees, these are criminals. And that representation of migrants and what I was seeing as someone who was living in Lithuania as a migrant myself really stayed with me, and it made me wonder, are they really criminals? What's going on here? And that's when I started digging into what was going on in the Belarusian border in 2021. And I, like as a journalist there, I was not there to report, but it's when you come across a story, and because of your own experience as a migrant, and in that moment my dad was also living as an undocumented migrant in South America, it really resonated with me personally. And I wanted to show that many of these migrants are not criminals, and you can not just replicate or simply tell the story the politicians want you to tell. As a journalist, you should go deeper, and that's what I wanted to do. And I ended up writing a story about the detention centers that in that moment were open in Lithuania, where many migrants and many people that were looking for asylum were detained for over a year without being able, like basically in prison, like they were not allowed to go outside. They had nothing to do in these places. And what I found was that they were painters. Many of them were painters, many of them were nurses, doctors, like very prepared professional people. They were actually trying their best to get the best out of that situation they were in. So they started painting and doing beautiful art that an NGO started bringing these pieces of art to Vilnius and selling them as a way to get them some money in this situation, right? And that was my starting point as an investigative journalist covering Eastern Europe. And I left Lithuania, but after that article, somehow I kept connected to these sources, with this NGO in particular, and then later on, when I had this opportunity to be part of the cross-border investigation, I remember that we had only resources to do Poland, but like Poland has been one of the countries that had been mostly reported in this crisis, but somehow Lithuania is always left out. And I was like, okay, if I'm gonna do this, I need to cover Lithuania as well. And that's why I decided to go to Vilnius. And in Vilnius, I came across Sanrim's story. And in that moment, no one had any idea of who Sanrim was. Like, he was already buried, and his grave didn't have a name on it. The government knew who he was, but somehow they hadn't announced this publicly. So it was a secret, how you call it? Silent secret that everyone knew, or the government knew, the NGOs knew, but there was no report about it. So it's like he didn't exist in a way, right? And the NGOs had reported a man was found in the river on August 2022, but because apparently no, because the story of Sanooja was not public, then this man didn't make it to the news, and no one cared to dig more into it. I got Sanooja's contact, and when I met Sanooja, I just remember how she was so outspoken and had this urge to tell her story. She, as a journalist who have been covering and interviewing so many people that are a victim of violence in borders, I meet so many people that they cannot tell their story, that are not ready or not prepared, or those traumatic experiences don't allow them to share their story with the world. But Sanooja had this desire to tell the world what had happened to her husband. And it was the beginning of a relationship that started in 2022, and that it has continued till now.
Yeah, I was going to say that there's always ethical concerns to worry about when you're trying to do this type of work, specifically in how you are, relaying someone's lived experience through these traumatic times. And a lot of times in our work in Greece and and then also in Poland, it's like in this border area, it is very tricky because you don't want to re-traumatize the individual who's gone through this experience, and then for family members who are trying to identify their loved ones who may have some sense of a path or a hope that they've identified the person wherever they may be. It's really unbelievably traumatic to go back into this emotionally. But it feels from this article, and also just every time I speak to you about this, it feels very much like you and Sanooja did this together, almost as if like she found you and was like, yes, Gabby's going to help me tell my story because the world needs to hear what happened to Sanrim. And it's like a very, very intense piece. For me, although that we have been in the region, still, even if I hadn't been in the region, your piece immediately transported me into the space. And it felt like I was walking alongside him as if I was another person along with him trying to go. And it's a really, really scary environment. Even in the middle of the day, after 2, 3 in the afternoon, you could suddenly find yourself very, very lost, and everything looks identical. You find yourself in the mud and the marsh, and it's really, really a scary environment that you could easily get disoriented in. But just prior to that, like Sanrim has a really complex story, how he gets to Europe in the first place. And again, we are definitely going to be pushing all of our viewers and listeners to read your piece because it's important and it's very well deserving of the Fetisov Award and all of the other accolades it's received. And as the Border Graves Project receives the European Press Prize, I mean, this is really seriously wonderful work. But it would be wonderful if you could help the viewers today understand a little bit of what Sanrim's journey was like to get to Europe in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there, as Sanrim and Sanooja's story, there are so many, right? But for me, as a journalist, was my desire with this story was to really pull the reader into their love story, like who they were before they crossed borders, like before Sanrim crossed that border, and who they are as a family, right? Who both grew up in Sri Lanka. They fell in love as teenagers. As kids, as schoolmates, and that's what I try to also tell through this story, like who they were as people, and that's something that we don't really see often in migration reporting. But and that's why people also get tired of this reporting, right? Especially now in Europe, when more than 29,000 people have died on European migration roads in the last decade. So I understand that for some people they can get tired of this news, right? And then people try to avoid this news, but I want to show that the Sanrim was not just a number, there was not just a statistic, but he was a father, that he was a husband, that he was a son, and well, to answer your question, So Sanrim and Sanooja, well, Sanrim made this decision of come to Europe, and before even coming, they made this whole plan of how am I going to get there, and they didn't have the resources to get here, and they decided to sell a plot of land of Sanrim in Sri Lanka. Even Sanooja sold some of her jewelry so that they could afford that trip for Sanrim. And Sanrim paid for a fake Schengen visa, and the starting plan was he will fly to Moscow and then go into Helsinki through Finland and enter the European Union with this fake visa, but it didn't work. And then he had to pivot it to plan B, and that's when he heard of the Belarusian path, where he didn't need a visa. He could just cross into Lithuania. But being in this forest, he was stuck in the forest for 8 days without water, without food, sometimes drinking dirty water from the rivers, and with pain in his stomach, because he had recently, before he left Sri Lanka, he had been operated of kidneys, and sometimes he will urinate blood. So a very difficult situation that he was telling all this to Sanooja while he was going through this trip. So they will talk on the phone, they will make video calls, they will send voice messages to each other, and finally he made it to Vilnius on the 8th time that he crossed. After several pushbacks, that he will cross into Vilnius and into Lithuania side, and then get back to Belarus, because the Lithuanian border guards will push him back into Belarus. But somehow he managed to get to Vilnius, and he had bought a ticket to go to Paris, where he was planning to start his new life. But on the third day, and this situation is not clear, this is what Sanooja told us what happened on that night. He enters his hotel in Vilnius, and the manager of the hotel called plainclothed officers, who grabbed him and whisked him back to the Belarusian border. It was already at night, and it was past midnight in Sri Lanka when Sanooja got this message from Sanrim saying, "No water, I think I'll die. I love you." And this is something that is not it's not new. Lithuanian border guards and Polish border guards both track daily pushbacks. If you go to their website, you will see how many pushbacks they have done since 2021.
Yeah, they're like celebrating it in some ways to say how effective they're being.
Yeah, exactly. And for me as a journalist, I was just really upset that, how is it possible that they track pushbacks, but they don't track people that have been reported missing? They don't track number of deaths. There is no way to find this information online, and even requesting information to their agencies, the government in Lithuania, was extremely hard. They won't share this information with you. So to be, when I talk to NGOs doing really, really amazing work in this region, they are the ones trying to connect the dots when they find a body, or someone on Facebook reports someone missing. They are the ones trying to connect, what's the gender, which date the person was reported missing, which day the body was found dead. If they have this information, trying to help their families to get an idea of where their loved one can be. But really, there is no support, no government responsible of doing this. And that was something that Sanooja also lived herself when she tried to reach out all of these agencies. detention centers in Lithuania. Maybe she thought like, okay, maybe he is detained in a migrant center in Lithuania. They will hung up on her, like no English, and hung up, like literally. She will email the police, and the police will say just no information. And it was until she came across this NGO CNS group in Lithuania that she sent them a message on Facebook, and they were the only ones that really have supported Sanooja, and they helped her to find.
Aside from this podcast, ReFOCUS as an organization is always in need of support, and we are not able to do the programming and the work we do without support from individuals like yourselves. There are many, many other grassroots organizations like ReFOCUS that have been fighting the good fight for over a decade in Greece, in the Balkans, and in other parts of Europe. We've decided to band together in a fundraising effort called Where We Rise, where all of these organizations that have been doing this really, really critical work are fighting individually to secure the funding to maintain their operations and their programming. So what we've decided to do is work together in that campaign. So the Where We Rise campaign has just kicked off, and it will run for the next 2 months. And our, I would say, not ambitious goal, but a necessary goal is to raise 1 million euros to ensure that all of these organizations are able to continue to critically provide supports. So please find it in your heart and in your wallets to support the Where We Rise campaign, and understand that your donation doesn't support just ReFOCUS, it supports 29 other organizations. We really appreciate it. Thank you.